Like the kind of the doghouse.
Okay, the time is upon us. Finally, we are getting the fight of the century. The fight that everybody has always wanted. I don't want to say dreaming of the day, because that's weird, but I was always hoping the day I would make this video. We finally have it. Errol Spence, Terrance Bud Crawford, this weekend in the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas for the undisputed welterweight championship of the world. Spence currently holds the WBA, IBF and WBC belt, with Crawford holding WBO belt. An incredible fight. The two best fighters at 147 bar, arguably the two best fighters in the whole of boxing. And yeah, I can't really speak highly enough of this fight. I've done a few videos on it now, and I think the overall consensus for this fight is this is a real super fight. This is the biggest fight in boxing since Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather. People might look at the likes of Golovkin, Canelo. They may look at Fury Wilder. But there's one thing that I will say about all those fights. Starting off with Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder is an incredibly hard puncher, somebody who's a destructive heavyweight. And, Tyson Fury is similarly a very skilled heavyweight. B. Vladimir Klitschko had the most to prove. They are elite heavyweights, but as boxers, the heavyweight division, I've often said, doesn't really reflect always the best boxing or the best fighter in the world. Obviously, the heavyweight champion naturally is the big dog of the sport, but I never really looked at Wilder and thought he was an elite fighter because he hadn't fought anybody in that level. Fury, he's beaten Wilder, he's beaten Klitschko, he's beaten Dillian Whyte, hasn't beaten Usyk, and hasn't beaten Joshua. There's still a lot of hurdles for those two to come over, for those two to really be considered in the elite category. Fury's the best heavyweight in the world, don't get that twisted, but there's still a lot he needs to do, I felt, Fury, to be in there. And same with Wilder. Wilder, as good as he was WBC heavyweight champion, he wasn't, at an elite level where he hadn't beaten a lot of guys that were considered very good. And the best one was Ortiz, who was a good fighter, but again, he's a older Cuban, tricky fighter, but nothing crazy. That wasn't, to me, the elite fighter in the elite. That was a very good fighter fighting a good fighter who potentially could be better. Golovkin and Canelo, you've got two great fighters going at it, but the difference with that is Golovkin was avoided by everybody. Nobody wanted to fight him because he was dangerous, and ultimately, I'm not saying he wasn't a great, but ultimately with Golovkin, he never fought anybody who really cemented his place, I think, amongst the elites in the division. He was the best guy, clearly, dominated everybody, but it wasn't the same. And with Canelo, he was elite, but again, people will hold the loss of Floyd over him, and Canelo, I think, is a superstar, and he has a skill to back it up, so I think you could say he's elite. Don't get me wrong, at this point in time, Canelo is elite, and so is Golovkin, but the difference is, Golovkin, to me, just hasn't really proven it over time. Ever since he's lost to Canelo, he hasn't really had any standout wins on his resume, and he's lost now twice to Canelo. Second time was close, this third time, simple win for Golovkin, for Canelo, so, again, wasn't really standing out to me. You could put, to me, think of the best fight you can make in every division. You can think of Fury Usyk. You can think of Bivol versus Beterbiev. You could think of, Canelo versus Benavidez, Devin Haney, Shakur Stevenson, Tank versus Shakur, or whatever you go for it. Inoue versus Tank if you want to go crazy. None of those fights compared to Spence and Crawford, because you are getting two truly proven elite operators of the sport, and this fight honestly is ridiculous. It's Terrance Bud Crawford, a former undisputed champion, has the opportunity to be the first fighter, I think, other than Clarissa Shields, to be undisputed in two weight divisions. Could make history. An excellent fighter, one of the greats, irrespective of what happens against Spence. Switch hitter, can fight out both stances, a very good boxer, an amazing finisher, has knockout power. A truly once in a lifetime fighter, an amazing fighter, and just because he hasn't got I won't say he hasn't got promotional skills, but just because he hasn't got the name, people kind of overlook him. He is an excellent fighter, and people need to really give him the respect. He is unbelievable. And then you have Errol Spence Jr. Errol Spence, a man who went to Sheffield, made Cal Brook quit in his hometown. He then went and collected the belt from Sean Porter, beat Sean Porter in his own game, and ended up knocking him down in the 11th round. And he fought your Dennis Ugas after a very bad eye injury and absolutely pieced Ugas up and ended up breaking his orbital bone. The same thing he did to Kell Brook. Errol Spence doesn't just win against guys, he beats them. He beats the fight out of them. If you want to fight one of these two, I think you'd rather fight Crawford, because Crawford will just knock you out straight and you can live with that. Spence will beat you and beat you and beat you into a submission. And it's just horrible. Fighting Errol Spence, it must be the most horrible thing in boxing, because the guy just does not leave you alone. And I just can't talk about this fight in any more higher terms than I can. It is truly, like I said, you rarely ever see the elite fighting, and this isn't like one good fighter against one elite. This is the elite fighter fighting another elite fighter. Two of the greats of the sport at this present moment. What Errol Spence has done, the car crash coming back, the way he breaks people down, southpaw, has horrible, horrible pressure. The body shots are fantastic. Terrance Crawford, a switch hitter, a fantastic boxer puncher, great from the outside, can box with you, can fight at both stances. It's just such a great fight, and we're so happy we're getting it at this current moment. When I look at it, both guys undefeated. Crawford 38-0, Spence 28-0. Both guys have a lot of knockouts. Spence got 22 knockouts, and Crawford has 29 knockouts. Height-wise, Spence has a slight edge in the height, and reach-wise, Crawford has a slight inch in reach advantage. And yeah, just such a great fight. And Spence, obviously, if we go for him, his last fight, he fought your Dennis Ugas, was able to, like I said, break Ugas' orbital bone and capture the belt. Before that, beat Danny Garcia with an excellent performance, and then before that, obviously, he fought Sean Porter. And there you go. Through a long list, he has an excellent resume, Spence. Then you got Crawford, beat Avanesyan in his last fight. Before that, he beat Sean Porter. Before that, Kell Brook. So, both guys, fairly similar activity, even though the people seem to think that it's such a massive advantage, the activity for Bud's side, but really it's quite even, to be honest with you. Neither of them are really the most active fighters in the world, so yeah, intriguing on this one. So there's a few things to consider in this fight. When it comes to a fight like this, I personally feel like in boxing, the best usually come out, and I feel with Spence and Crawford, the first thing that people like to talk about is resume. Resume-wise, I don't think it's close. I think Spence has the far better resume. Crawford beat a lot of good guys, but all respect to Ricky Burns and Indongo and Gamboa, they're good fighters, but they're not the great fighters, you know. And Spence hasn't beaten anybody on the level of Crawford and vice versa, but Spence has beaten Kell Brook when he was champion, when he went and beat Sean Porter and did it in his own country. He also beat Sean Porter when he was WBC champion. You know, he's beating guys who are very, very good at the time of champion. I think Crawford beat guys who were good, but not very good when they were champion, and that's the difference. And I think that the level of competition that Spence's fought is just higher than Crawford, and it's not Crawford's fault. He didn't fight in a weight class ultimately that had a crazy amount of talent. You know, you look at 135 now, for example, where Crawford did fight. Crawford never had a Devin Haney, never had Shakur Stevenson, never had Tank, Ryan Garcia, Frank Martin, you know, Lomachenko. He never had all these guys. He had guys who were substandard, and I believe, again, he just kind of fought at the wrong time. But at welterweight, he's had that a bit more. His best win, I think, of his career was Sean Porter, which he did really well. Losing the fight, or he wasn't losing, but he got told that he was losing, and he just switched the gear and ended up stopping Sean Porter, even though I would argue it wasn't really a stoppage, but, you know, is what it is. And, yeah, he's improved ever since. At welterweight, he's stopped every single person, and I think we're watching a great fighter, and he will be the best fighter of his era if he can get this one over the line. And if he can beat Spence, it would be a massive statement. But for Errol Spence, if he can beat Crawford, it would probably cap off one of the most impressive welterweight runs I think we've seen from a fighter, probably since the likes of Floyd or Amani. I think I never watched Sugar Ray Leonard and all these other welterweights of the past, but I feel like you got to put Spence in a conversation. If he beats all Crawford, he's beaten literally everyone. The only guys he can beat now are the younger ones, like the likes of a Boots Ennis or a Virgil Ortiz or if Conor Benn comes back, those type of guys. But yeah, I just don't see it really. Those guys, I don't see those guys fighting him anytime soon. I think he'll move up again, regardless of what happens in this fight. It's such a great fight, like I said, and I'm so excited for this one. And I think resumes on Spence's side. Skill-wise, I think Crawford's a bit more skilled than Spence. Fundamentally, I think they're both very solid, but I actually think Spence is so solid. And sometimes the flashy stuff isn't always what works. Sometimes just having solid fundamentals works, you know. I wouldn't say Tyson Fury is very flashy, but it worked. What he did against Wilder, the way he beat him up. Wilder's more flashy in that he's a bit more destructive with his knockouts, but ultimately that didn't matter when they fought. And I think, not saying the same thing will happen because Crawford and Wilder are two different, like, kettle of fish in terms of the level. But one thing about Crawford, and I think he has got this, is he has solid fundamentals, he has all the footwork, but Spence just really has a real solid grasp of it in a way that people don't really realise. And he's obviously, people talk about him not being a boxer. He's an Olympian, you know. This guy can box. The way people talk as if he's just a slugger, that's just his style. But ultimately, if you ask him to box like he did against Mikey Garcia, he can do that with ease. I don't think it's a question. So, yeah. An intriguing fight, this one. Stylistically, so interesting. Haven't been this excited for a fight in years. And if you want to look, as I always do the whole looking at what both fighters should do and the strengths and weaknesses. So, starting off, I'll go off with Terrance Bud Crawford. Now, Crawford's a slightly rangier fighter, but not by a lot. I would say Crawford has maybe snappier punches, but I feel like Spence is naturally the harder hitter. So I think the first thing I'm going to say, Crawford's excellent at middle range. So that's the first thing. I think keeping this fight at mid range. I don't think you want to get too close to Spence because we know how good he is. And you don't want to fight at a certain distance because ultimately the reach isn't that much in your advantage that you can do that. So I think you keep his fight at mid range. Don't engage Spence too close because that's when he will bully you in there. But I think you keep it at mid range, you can pop the jab. Keep Spence guessing. I think if you can catch him, that's how you're going to catch him in the middle range. You won't catch him up close. I could easily see, Spence overextending, which he has a tendency to do, and Crawford catching him with a shot. I think it's going to be hard for either of these guys to knock the other out because they're both so good. But Crawford definitely has the capability, I think, of putting Spence down, and I think vice versa. But Crawford definitely can time you coming in, and I think that's what I think you're not going to do it up close unless Spence gets very reckless, which I don't think he will. And from a distance, Spence is he's too well versed and too much experience to get hit with a shot from out of range. He's only going to get caught in the mid-range, Spence, so I think that's what we need to do. Keep it at mid-range. And the second thing, and one of Spence's biggest tools is his jab. That jab is so solid and it sets up all his work. I think if you can fight out southpaw, I'd fight out southpaw, not for all the fight, but for most of the fight. I think if I'm Crawford, I'm fighting out southpaw simply because you can then take away his jab, you can pour out the jab, you can frustrate Spence in there, and I think at southpaw it makes it harder for Spence to really establish the jab in the same way. Against a conventional fighter, you have a much easier time to do it. Obviously the angles are different, and you're able, and Spence has got a very long and lean body, so he's able to naturally snap his hand out and get it back very quickly. Whereas as a southpaw, he's going to be harder for Spence to land on Crawford. So I say that would be the second one to do. This whole fight out southpaw. And this third point, and I think this is sort of a two-parter. What Crawford cannot allow Spence to do is I don't think he can allow Spence to back him up. If he does that, I know Crawford's excellent at countering. I don't care how good countering you are. You can count a 1-2 shot, but Spence throws 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're not going to count all of them. Eventually, one will get through, and I don't think it's smart. And I think personally, if I'm Crawford, I'm not fighting fire with fire, but what I would do, first thing I'm going to say, I think you go to the body, but also I think back Spence up to an extent, hold center ring. I think this is so key because to me, when I look at Crawford, he's so skilled, but he's never fought anybody like Spence. He's fought guys similar, but never somebody like him who's got the skill, the aggression, the power, and the sort of solid grasp of the fundamentals that Spence has, and the IQ as well. Spence is a very smart fighter. People don't really look at it, but the way he kind of steps around the foot to land the body shot, he's so well versed at this. And I think in this fight, Crawford has to really... He can't go crazy defensive, and he also can't be ultra on the attack, because either way, I think he's going to suffer. Like I said, there has to be a middle ground in this, and a real solid one. Otherwise, Spence will insert his will on you, and he has a tendency to do this, Spence, where he will constantly come forward and break you, and that's what he tries to do. And Spence will fight that way for the whole fight. You know, he doesn't gas out. So I think to take the wind out of his sails and stop him coming forward, like I said, I think go to the body, and I think holding center ring is important for Crawford. You want to try and push Spence back and let him taste your power, see if he can handle it. Because either way, even if he takes one, you know, we all know that Crawford can hit hard and can drop you. It's not just the power of Crawford, it's the timing, it's the anticipation. He knows how to time people beautifully, and I think that'd be the first thing I'd say. I mean, the first thing I would say is I think hold center ring and make sure you don't give any ground to Spence. And like I said, I think these three things I think are the big ones for Crawford. Like I said, keep the fight at the mid range, fight out of southpaw, take away that jab of Spence, and I would say hold center ring and try and back Spence up here and there. But don't go crazy, because Spence is... I think out of the two, Spence is obviously going to win if they had a back and forth war. But God, I'm excited for this one, and it should be a good one. And then we go to the unified unified welterweight champion of the world, Errol Spence Jr. First thing I'll say about Spence. Spence has a tendency to, once he sets a pace on guys, he is damn near impossible to stop, because he gets into a rhythm. And again, it's not just the pace and the rhythm, it's just the skill of Spence. You can't... It's the difference between Spence and guys who are aggressive. A different weight class completely. Let's just use Derek Chisora, for example. Derek Chisora goes after you. The difference with Derek Chisora, one, he doesn't have the skill of an Errol Spence. He also doesn't have the discipline or the conditioning that Errol Spence has. Spence set a pace on Yordenis Ugas, and Ugas just could not keep up. He was drowning in there, and don't get me wrong, Crawford isn't Ugas, but Spence showed that's one thing he has. He can go all day. I think if this was back in the day and it was a 15-rounder, Spence could still hang in there. He has the gas tank of a fighter who will keep going and going and going, and those are the worst type of fighters, and I don't really see him gassing out in this one. This is the fight of his life. He's going to make sure he's in as tip-top shape as possible. So, yeah, I don't see Spence ever sort of gassing out in this one. And point where I'm going with this, my first point with Spence is, Spence, like I said, he can keep going. So what I'm going to do if I'm Spence, Crawford has a tendency to start off very slow in fights. A little bit like what Lomachenko does. He downloads the data, so to speak, and then he kind of picks it up. I think if you're Errol Spence, you play on this. Errol Spence, like I said, he starts off at a pace and he just picks it up and up and up. And he starts off quite active. He throws a lot of punches per round, Spence. And I think if you can start off quick on Crawford, really insert your will, put it on him, and bank 1 round, 2 round, 3 round, 4 round. If it gets to the point where Crawford needs to start winning rounds, that's when the openings will come for the big shots and for the body to be exposed, because you can give away rounds to Sean Porter, you can give away rounds to some of these other guys, to Kabilaskis, to Brook, to all these other guys. However, the difference here, they ain't Errol Spence. And if Errol Spence can keep it on him, keep it 3 round, 4 round, 5 round, if you can almost do what Teofimo did to Lomachenko and get to a point where he needs to really pick it up, he may get wild, and that's where you could time Crawford, because Crawford will get hit by Kabilaskis, and I can just see him... Again, I don't think it will be any of these guys will get knocked out, but I do believe that if either get reckless, the other guy will take advantage. Both guys are so seasoned and experienced, so that's what makes it so great. So, first one, start off quick if you're Spence. You bank enough rounds, and I think the judges are going to be on his side anyway, because he is the naturally bigger name, even though he's not the favourite. But I think that's the first one. Second one, it depends on the referee really, but I feel like the referee should be okay with this. Try and beat Bud up in the clinch. What I mean by this, up close. Now, Crawford used to be a wrestler, so I don't doubt he is very strong, but Spence is naturally, he's more like a bulldozer in the clinch, Spence. He really does his best work on the inside, beating you up, and if he gets Crawford there, there's going to be problems. And I feel Crawford's, don't get me wrong, he's strong, but let's not get this twisted. Errol Spence is almost like a middleweight in there. You've seen this guy, he is balloons up to a very big weight, and I don't think Crawford could ever fight a middleweight. I might be wrong, but I just don't see it. I think 154 is his limit. I think Spence could go to middleweight. There's no talk about Canelo fighting Crawford, but there's talk about Canelo fighting Spence, because Spence has the size on him, and he will, if they get up close, I think he'll bully Crawford in there. And I don't think, if you're Crawford, you want to keep that separation, but if I'm Spence, I'm getting in that clinch and I'm beating him up on the inside, because that's when I believe you'll see Spence have a lot of success up close. Same way I said, Crawford can't allow Spence to get up close. If you're Spence, you get up close, you make it horrible for Crawford and do a Marcos Maidana on him, but in your own way, obviously, because Spence is his own fighter. But yeah, I think get up close, get in the clinch. And then my third point of what I believe Errol Spence should do, and I actually kind of just said it then, to be honest, but keep the fight up close, make it Crawford fight out of a phone booth. Crawford's so good at excellent. However, some fighters are good at everything, but they're not great at everything. It's not as if there's no fighter who is a better, fighter defensively than Floyd Mayweather, as well as being a knockout artist like Deontay Wilder, who also has the speed of a Manny Pacquiao. Not every fighter has everything. There's some things that Crawford isn't going to be as good at. For example, should Crawford choose to fight Boots Ennis? It's going to be controversial. I think Boots Ennis is a better switch hitter than Crawford, and Boots can switch so seamlessly, and he can let his hands go. So I think that's one area I would argue that Boots is better than Crawford at. And also, obvious this, but if, Crawford fought a Charlo or somebody like that, those guys naturally hit harder. There's certain things Crawford has, but he's not going to be better than Spence up close, is what I'm saying here. Spence has the advantage up close. I don't believe that Crawford, if Spence asserts his will on Crawford, I don't think Crawford will know how to handle it as well as maybe you might think. I think he'll definitely will adapt, and he's very good at this, and I think it'll be close, but I do think that Crawford up close isn't a better up close fighter than Spence. Spence makes you fight in a phone booth, and when he does that, and once he gets into this percussive rhythm of landing one shot, two shot, going head body, you can't stop him. He doesn't leave you alone, and I think this is what Crawford can't allow him to do. Before Spence, you want to make this fight up and close, you want to rip the body. Occasionally his punches can stray low, Spence, but that's what happens. If you're a body puncher, sometimes it does happen when you go a bit low. But Spence will dig that body of Crawford, and this also ties into being beating Crawford up in the clinch. If you can get him up close and land those big shots, I think it's going to be a problem for Crawford. But an excellent fight though, and that's my three things. So, like I said, for Errol Spence, you start off quick, make sure you bank a few rounds, 4 or 5 rounds, make Crawford chase the fight a bit. You beat up Crawford in the clinch, and I think you make the fight a phone booth. You fight up close, make it horrible. And I think for both guys, I think these three things are pretty clear. I can't see either straying from this either. Maybe Crawford won't fight out of southpaw, but like I said, you're Crawford, you keep the fight at mid-range, you fight out of southpaw to take away that jab of Spence, and you hold centre ring and don't give ground to Spence. With Spence, start off quick, you beat up Bud in the clinch, and you put the fight up close and get right in Crawford's face. Don't be stupid, obviously, because Crawford's dangerous, but you make it a horrible fight for Crawford, right in front of him, ripping the body, and I think both guys will have success if they were to sort of at least put one of these out there. If Crawford just fought at southpaw, it would still give Spence a lot to think about, even if he didn't do those other things. So, yeah, great fight. Now, prediction time. A great fight. I think it's so close. I think you could go either way. Honestly, even though Spence is my favourite fighter, I do like Crawford a lot, and if he won, I wouldn't be upset. I do like Crawford, and I think he's such a great ambassador for the sport. He doesn't really trash talk, he doesn't really get into trouble outside the ring. He's such a great fighter, but what I believe will happen is Crawford's tendency to start off slow will cost him in this fight. He's also getting on a bit, Crawford. I think Spence will bag 1 round, 2 round, 3 round, 4 rounds. I think he'll be about 5 rounds up at a certain point, and that's when Crawford will try to turn up, and he will get the advantage. He will probably tag Spence a few times, but what will happen, I believe, is then Spence will then put it on Crawford, and that's when you may see a Hagler Hearns, or these two going back and forth. And I think Spence is working the first 5 rounds, and I think his work towards the end of the fight, I think he'll really put it on Crawford, and it will be a great fight. And I think the body shots will tell. I think Crawford may slow down towards the end of the fight, but Ultimately, it's close. Like I said, if you think Crawford wins, I don't think you're stupid. I think it's a very good pick because Crawford is elite and there are some things he has over Spence. However, I think Errol Spence Jr. gets it done via decision. I don't think either of these two knock each other out. I think they're too good to get knocked out. I also don't think some people go crazy and think it'd be a one-sided beatdown from Crawford or by Spence. I don't think it'll be an easy fight for either of these guys. They're both very good, but either way, the fight that we wanted is here. Spence Crawford. As always, I will do a breakdown after the fight. There's probably going to be a rematch at 154, and I look forward to that. But either way, it's great that we finally got it. We didn't think we were, but we're here. Spence Crawford, July 29th. Like I said, review after the fight. And yeah, until next time.